All right, everybody, welcome to yet another very special episode of the Mike Sennello Show. Tonight, we're going to be interviewing Board of Finance candidate Robyn Mann. First, before we get into that, just want to apprise everybody of the schedule this week. This week, we're going to be wrapping up our interview series with Board of Finance Chairman Walter O'Connor. That's Wednesday night at 7 p.m. I've gone through all of this series both on my Facebook page and on my YouTube channel. On YouTube, all of these videos are in a playlist, so you can easily find them and you can easily follow them. We've interviewed a slew of members of both the Board of Education, the Board of Finance, the Town Council. We even got a chance to interview the mayor. So if you guys want to follow along with that series, it's on my Facebook page and it's on my YouTube channel. Those watching at home from YouTube or from Facebook, if you'd prefer to watch on YouTube, you can watch on YouTube. Link is in this video's description. If you are watching from YouTube and you'd prefer to watch on Facebook, the link is in this video's description. And with that said, as we always do, if you have questions for our guest tonight, Robyn Mann, who's running for Board of Finance, as we always do, we'll cap our interview with your audience Q&A. So if you have questions, get those questions in now. If you have hard-hitting questions, don't be afraid to get those questions in. When they come to you, get those questions in, and we will cap the interview with our audience Q&A. That's your way of getting access to these candidates in as direct a manner as possible. If you're chiming in from YouTube, we'll get to that commentary. If you're chiming in from Facebook, we'll get to those questions as well. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring in our guest for tonight, Robyn Mann. Robyn, thanks for coming on the show tonight.
Well, thank you for asking me to come on the show, Mike.
Glad to have you. So, Robyn, before we get started, if you could just let everybody know, how can people reach and follow you?
I think people should just call me. If they've got something that they want to share, I'm all ears. I give out my phone number to just about anybody. I'm here. My number is 718-316-2219. Please call me. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
That is a gutsy move, giving out your personal phone number. I wouldn't have those guts. But Robyn, just one thing before we get started, if you could just speak up, I'm having a hard time picking you up on the audio here. So
okay, I'll speak louder.
Thank you so much. All right, so I think we should get this out of the way before we start our line of questioning here, so folks know at home, and so Robyn gets the disclaimer too. So I don't normally mention party affiliation because it really shouldn't matter at a local level, and here in Milford, historically, it really hasn't. But tonight we have a first, and since it's a first, I'll go ahead and mention it. Robyn is our first ever DTC nominated candidate to agree to come onto our show, and the first Democrat to agree on this year. So my sincerest and genuine thanks, Robyn, for agreeing to come on. I really appreciate that. So
no problem. Why wouldn't I take this opportunity?
Of course. As I've said, I'm happy to have on anyone of any party affiliation. And since you're a guest on my show, you always get treated as a guest on my show with cordiality and civility. As I've also mentioned, that doesn't mean softballing. That doesn't mean you're not going to get hard questions, but it's grace, civility, and gratitude. So to the audience, because I know my audience, if you have tough questions, like I said, as we always do, and as I've always said, get them in, and this is your opportunity to access the candidates and ask them tough questions you've been asking, as we've done throughout the questions you guys have been asking throughout the course of the series, and we'll get to our Q&A. But before we do, let's go ahead and get in on this interview, and we'll do it the same way we always start every interview, because I like to get to know the person a little bit before we get to know the candidate. It's the same question we start off with everyone who comes on the shows. What brought you, Robyn, to New Milford?
A beautiful antique house in a beautiful town. So I was living in New York City. I have a law practice, and all of my court appearances got canceled in March of 2020. And I'm sitting in my apartment with my husband, and he and I look at each other and say, we're not going to ride this out for whatever amount of time it takes. In our apartment, we're going to go to our weekend house. So we had just bought this house in October before the pandemic started, and we were using it on the weekends, which is wonderful. And it is a beautiful home in a beautiful town. We got here, and my husband, the quintessential New Yorker, within about 6 or 8 months said to me, I don't want to leave. So here we are, and I'm very happy to be here.
So we've actually, what I primarily do isn't this. It's landscaping, and home maintenance. So, and handyman work. So I've noticed an influx of work, which I love, because of people coming here from specifically New York City. And they tell me the same thing. Like New York City during COVID was a really hard thing to deal with. So we came out to the country. So would you describe yourself as one of these COVID moves to New Milford?
Yes, but I'm always a country girl.
Okay.
I grew up in Westchester, so I'm from New York originally. I went to Cardozo Law School, so I do know the city very well, and I lived for quite a while there. But I raised my children in Colorado, and I love living in the country, so I'm very happy here.
Excellent. So we get a timeline for all of that. So when you moved here, I want to get the transition from you moving here to getting your interest here in government and politics here, because you're running for elected office. So what first sparked your interest in local government and politics here in New Milford?
I've always wanted to do politics. Now I'm a practicing attorney, and I have 2 children. And so when I was younger, and they were actively within my life, I was working, and my political involvement involved things like working on the Parks and Recreation Committee for my town, doing specific projects with relation to like a community center, legal projects. So I always provided my time, either pro bono or low bono, for government and my community. Now, I don't have children at home, and I'm building a new practice in Connecticut, and I'm excited to do so. This was a great opportunity for me to realize what I really like to do, which is being involved with the community. And then my daughter started a master's program in public administration and public policy. And she and I talk about politics, and specifically local politics, all the time. And the light bulb went off. I'm like, okay, this is the time to try to give back, try to give.
All right. Well, then in that respect, let's get it to the Board of Finance. Since the Board of Finance is not exactly the most high attention office, we'll call it, the mayor and the town council are, and they attract basically all the attention. What about the Board of Finance struck your interest?
Yeah. A couple things. It is the kind of commitment that I could make right now. I am presently working for the Small Business Administration as an attorney advisor. My commitment to them is 60 hours a week. So I am very busy. And I just did not see myself being able to either run a campaign or be involved with a town council or a mayor's position. It's not within my bailiwick right now. Plus, I don't think anybody really knows me. Board of Finance was an opportunity for me to introduce myself to the community, my abilities, which obviously with my experience and background, finance is something I work with all the time. So I'm very happy to be able to work in that capacity here.
And we're actually going to talk about that, your background and your legal practice, in just a minute, to see how that correlates to how you view the role of the Board of Finance. And so let's just ask that question then. What do you view as the proper role of the Board of Finance in New Milford?
Yeah, I think it is to collect information from the community and digest it, and then provide support to the town council and the mayor with regard to what the budget could look like and should look like to meet the needs and desires of our local community.
Do you think there's a fiduciary role with the Board of Finance to those bodies that you just mentioned?
Really, Mike, I don't know how to answer that.
Okay, all right.
Everything I do has a fiduciary role. I'm an attorney, so I have clients and I have, serious responsibilities to them. I would hope that it would be mutually supportive, the Board of Finance, the town council, and the mayor, to work together to provide, fiduciary or not.
All right. So in that respect, then, we've talked about the Charter Revision Commission. You weren't here for that. So the only reason we've talked about it is because the 2 previous Board of Finance candidates we've had on, just by pure chance, happened to have served on that commission. And there were some changes that were made during that revision just a few years ago that affected the Board of Finance. So we've kind of already talking about that, and it would be kind of unfair to grill you on a board commission that was a temporary board commission that dissolved, a couple of years before you even came here. So, but one of the things that was brought up, one of the suggestions that was made from the audience to the Charter Revision Commission at one of their meetings was to dissolve the Board of Finance. Do you think that would you actually agree at this point with the dissolution of the Board of Finance?
No, of course not. I think the Board of Finance serves a very important function. I understand that the charter limits its decision-making authority.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put it that way. And I understand that that makes it seem as if it doesn't have any impact, but it does. I mean, every spring, it's the Board of Finance that hears what is expected from the community. And every spring, it's the Board of Finance that gives its expertise towards that process into creating the budget. And that's just something that I don't think should be left on the plate of the town council or the mayor. First of all, they probably, they should be separated from it at some level. And there should be ears that are a little bit broader and a little bit more neutral to listen to that kind of community involvement. So I do think that that's not the future of the Board of Finance. The future of the Board of Finance might be getting the true expertise that the town needs in the financial characters.
Okay, so that actually segues to the next topic. It seems like you're elucidating two roles for the Board of Finance, two duties of the Board of Finance. One is as a check, effectively, on the town council, the legislative arm of the legislative arm of the town of New Milford. And the second seems to be to provide a special expertise, to serve a special expertise in finance that's kind of difficult to have. Am I characterizing what you're describing correctly?
Yeah, but I don't think that the check is mutual.
Yeah.
We check them, they check us. That's what a democratic government does.
All right, then. So we've asked this question of all of the Board of Finance candidates so far. The Board of Finance is, as far as I can tell, the only board or commission to have an explicitly academic course of study in its name. So do you think Board of Finance candidates ought to have a special financial acumen to hold a seat on the Board of Finance?
So I've gone to some meetings of the Board of Finance, and I don't think that there's anything being presented in those meetings that I can't digest and understand. I think that you want people on there who are interested in financial issues and who can, digest the information, understand it, and possibly communicate it to the community so that it is digestible for them as well. So I do not think it's necessary to have a financial background. You have your director of finance, and he's got that background, he's got that ability, and that's the guy who's really responsible. We're a community arm. We are definitely talking to the community and bringing together the information from the director of finance, town council, and the mayor with the community, and that's a very important aspect.
That's interesting you said that, because now we're up to full-on unanimity with the candidates I've interviewed on that you don't need a credential in finance to serve to serve the proper role as a member of the Board of Finance. Speaking to that, though, Diane Clafe, when we had her on, who said the same thing, that you don't need that credential at all, went so far as to mention it might be useful to have an attorney on the Board of Finance for addressing certain legal and policy matters that may come up. Is this a sentiment you agree with? I'm assuming the answer is yes, so we'll expand upon that with a two-parter. And can you speak to how that might actually come into play?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, as an attorney, I'm very well trained to look at all kinds of legal documents, but I also look at financial documents. My role in my practice is to understand the finances of my parties, of my clients in particular, and of opposing parties, and to be able to create a paradigm. I do matrimonial law mostly and real estate. So to create a paradigm which brings my client out of the divorce in the best case scenario financially. So I have to understand deeply what all of these financial particulars are. And then obviously everything I read as a lawyer. So obviously if it's put in front of me, I'm going to give a legal view on it.
Okay. So let's delve into that area of practice, your practice a little bit. Can you be a little bit more specific on your primary areas of practice? You said it was real estate and matrimony law. Can you give a breakdown, let's say a rough percentage of the time that you spend on, let's say, matrimony, real estate, and whatever else you might do?
So if you recall, right now I'm working for the Small Business Administration, right? So let's do this before I took this job, which was in November of 2020, right? And I did that because I wanted to be able to provide my services to the small businesses, and they were really struggling. They were closing by the dozens. So in that capacity, I work with small businesses, which is very much a evaluation of their corporate structure and of how they do business in order to do the due diligence to give them a loan. Okay, because I work with the EIDL loans that are being funded through the SBA. Prior to that, I was a matrimonial attorney in New York. I started specializing in that practice in 2012. I received extensive training in mediation. And when I go through a divorce, it is always with the mediation training in mind. This is a family structure that's being changed. It's terribly hurtful and damaging to many people. This is important for me to recognize and understand. I'm not here to gouge anybody financially through their suffering. I am here to help hold their hand and give them the support and services they need to get to the other side in a major change in their life. Okay. All of my work in New York has been matrimonial since 2012. All right. And when my children were young, I was practicing real estate law exclusively. So I've used my my law degree to serve my life. I wanted to be able to be there for my children when they were young, but yet make an income. And that practice of real estate law meant that I could basically have an 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 p.m. practice. Okay. And I didn't have to be in court or on call for judges or anything like that. So I did real estate for about 8 years in Pitkin County, Colorado, and where Aspen is, which is very sophisticated real estate law and zoning law. So I have a lot of experience with a very sophisticated zoning structure. And I understand the impacts financially of real estate on a community very, very deeply. I understand it from the perspective of, development and zoning requirements. So I understand all that.
It seems like this seems like a lead towards zoning. How much do you think the Board of Finance deals with the zoning board?
I don't know if it does at all. And
Okay.
that's not what I'm interested in. I like to learn new things anyway. And as I said, the zoning board was not appropriate for me with this type of work schedule I'm involved in.
Okay.
Honestly,
speaking-
I can't get over.
So speaking to that, then you said you work 60 hours a week. So folks know at home, that's probably not a lie at all. That's actually pretty low for attorneys for the most part. They usually work really, really long hours. So how much time would you think you would be willing to devote? The Board of Finance meets once a month. So let's talk about over the course of a month. How much time do you think you'd be willing to devote to preparing for Board of Finance meetings over the course of, say, a month?
Well, I would do what was necessary to feel prepared. But having said that, I've talked to a few of the Board of Finance members who are there right now. They've given me an idea of what the hours are. I didn't make this choice lightly. I understand that the commitment is a growing commitment as we approach budget season, and that there is a time period after budget is passed where it kind of gets a little bit lighter. I understand the ebb and flow of it. And I understand when things arise that are, having to be looked into deeper by the Board of Finance. I understand the commitment that needs to be made there. So I've definitely looked at it. Obviously the meetings are not the problem. It is all the education. And if it's put in front of me, I'm going to educate myself and be ready for the meetings.
And we're going to get into specifics on that too, because you briefly mentioned the budget. We're going to definitely talk about that for sure, because it's the Board of Finance. And that's really the only time of year that anyone pays attention to the Board of Finance. So we'll get into that in a minute. But you did mention that you're working with a lot of these small businesses, and a lot of them have come to you and said that, they're closing. Mm-hmm. Can you relate to us what they've told you as the rationale for that? Why are small businesses closing?
Well, originally it was because nobody was walking in the door.
Obviously that's the case. Is there a deeper thing beyond that?
Well, they can't get employees.
Okay.
Right now, they're really having a hard time filling their employees, meeting the demand, because demand is on the rise. And so it's great, but people are not going back to work. So, there's that problem. I think it's just a lag. I think people will end up going back to work. I think a lot of people transitioned away from what they were doing in 2019 to something new, and they're finding that they enjoy it. And so they're not going to leave very easily. So I think there's going to be a restructuring in terms of where the economy is and who's spending money where and how it's being spent and where the employees are available. But only time will tell that exactly what's going to happen. But small business has always been the bulwark of our economy, and it is always going to be that. There are millions of small businesses. There's tons of them here.
Yeah.
And there's really great small businesses here. And I see some of them folding, unfortunately. But I believe in the mission of the SBA to provide support loans for small businesses. I always have. So happy to be there.
Yeah, and this town, I'm sure you've seen, is the backbone of this town is small businesses. We have very few, the days of a few industrial employers employing thousands of people in this town are long gone. So it is really just small businesses that this town is living and dying on right now. And a lot of them are struggling. So,
May I interject something?
Shoot.
I got my absentee ballot today. I highly recommend to everybody that they go out and get their absentee ballot and take advantage of the opportunity to vote. Voting is your privilege. It is the most important thing you can do in a democracy as an individual. I would love to see us have a huge turnout this year. That would be probably the most important thing that I could get excited about.
Yeah, I don't honestly know what the expectation is going into this season because it's kind of an odd season. It's kind of unlike some of the other seasons prior, just because of the not only the influx of people who are especially new to the town, which I mean it's a self-serving interest, but I like it. I like having people, new clients, right? But yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing too with the expansion and the explosion of the mail-in procedure. I'm curious to see how that winds up working out because there's probably going to be a lot more absentee ballots than we've ever had in Milford. That's my guess. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes through. I think
the town's totally ready for it.
Yeah.
I think they're on top of this.
So the two issues that we're going to talk about tonight, because with the Board of Finance, I'm sure you'll see everything. It's mostly handled ad hoc, right? The issues that you're going to run into, you don't really know what they're going to be until you run into them with the Board of Finance. This is not some federal agency that's got some 10-year, 20-year track problem that, every 4 years you're going to run into. With the Board of Finance, there really isn't much of that. But this year, we do have something that we know that you're going to run into in terms of an issue, and that's the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funds. It's been something that's been going through. As far as the Board of Finance is concerned, there's a very limited role here. And on this channel, we've kind of beaten this subject to death. So we'll try to keep it short and sweet. But do you see any, you were at the meeting, I think I saw you at the meeting where they most recently discussed the ARPA funds. Do you see any issue with the Board of Finance not having any legal authority or purview on the expenditures coming from this fund?
I think it would be great to have another arm of the government involved in the decision-making. And the Board of Finance, with its background and expertise and its budget role, probably would be a good role model for that. But it's not how the charter is written, so it's not going to happen. So
we've talked about charter revision. Do you see, Pete Bass has mentioned that although the town is legally obligated to assemble a charter revision commission every 10 years, he'd like to see it a lot more often than that to address potential oversights like something like this, or to just do it every 3 or 4 years and have them saying, there's nothing that we really recommend. The charter looks fine. Do you see this as something of a whole that would be worth recommending the Charter Revision Commission look at?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And if they recommended it to referendum, a revision of some sort so that the Board of Finance would have oversight over these type of expenditures, is this something you'd be in favor of?
So it's not a black and white choice.
Right.
It's not either in or out. There's lots of, paradigms that could be implemented to bring the Board of Finance voice in and to give the Board of Finance more of the responsibilities financially, really honestly. And I think that that's good for any community to have as many voices as possible involved in all decisions, financial included. So it's not an either or. And I do think, though, that there can be a review of it. It's very unusual to have a Board of Finance that doesn't have any real decision-making authority. So I think it would be smart to look at that and see what the pros and cons are.
Yeah, it's specific to these expenditures, which I found odd personally. So as far as the ARPA conditions are concerned, there's a ton of strings, if you will, that are attached to these ARPA funds. Like you can only spend them in a certain way. You have to spend them in a certain amount of time. There's a lot of conditions. And I'm asking this question because I think with your expertise as an attorney, this is kind of right under your umbrella here. Is there any expenditure that's either been approved or recommended, say, to the town council or to our mayor, or requested from the town council or mayor that you think doesn't meet the ARPA conditions?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I do know that I heard about a dam being replaced with the funds. And, I was definitely surprised because just on its face, it does not seem like that kind of infrastructure work would be within the definition of the use of these funds. And I asked Pete, and he had he knew exactly where the funds were allowed within the statute, within the language of the statute. So he has actually looked at it. He's looked at it with the town attorney. I trust them to take that information and understand it and know what they can and cannot do with the funds. At this point in time, that's all I know about it, actually. But I was surprised. We're using money for infrastructure projects that probably, I would say, should be coming out of our regular budget, but that's okay.
Okay, so if there were no strings attached to the $7.9 million that we're getting, what are the kinds of things that you would like to see if there weren't any strings attached?
That's a great question. I think we need to really, this town needs to have a really, really strong community center. When I moved to Aspen in 1990, I was involved with what's known as the Red Brick Center for the Arts and the development of it. And they took a school, and it was long time the elementary, middle, and high school. The community outgrew its purpose. They bought it, and they had a referendum, and they went through the process of renovating it and creating an arts center. This is where all the nonprofits are housed, or many of them, for reduced rate rent. It's managed by the city, but it goes through the Aspen Snowmass Council for the Arts in terms of who's in there and how it's being used. There are art spaces, there are showing spaces, there's galleries, and it was a thrilling experience. But mostly, it's a beautiful building now. They did a beautiful renovation, but mostly it just brought a sector of the community get together that created a real strong backbone for everybody. So Aspen is a unique community because, it starts out at 7,000 people and it grows to 35,000 people every winter, right? And it does this blossoming. So it's very hard in a town like that to have that community structure. You have to work really hard to bring the people who live there year round together in places. And a community center like that does it. During the COVID pandemic, I thought we really needed that kind of community center in a bigger way than perhaps Pettibone is at this point. It's great that it was there to serve as a vaccine site, and certain other things were very useful, but the building's not really there's been no imagination applied to the use of that building as a community center. And I wonder why. I think we really deserve it and we really need it.
So I think I actually have to pick your brain on this one. This is not a topic I actually had in my notes here, but we're going to have to delve into this because this has kind of been a hot button topic and a very contentious one for probably 6 or 7 years now. So are you familiar with the history in New Milford as it relates to not just Pettibone, but the concept of a community center?
No, you could probably educate me some more.
Okay. Well, I don't have time to do it here because it's 4 years at least of going back and forth, and this is something I actually put a video on my Facebook page on. It's called the Community Center Adventure. It gives you all my thoughts. I've included snippets from town council meetings, from Board of Education meetings. I've included subcommittee hearings. Basically, I've cited all of my sources. Anytime I make a claim,
you have, and I couldn't find it today. Otherwise, I would have been much more educated on it.
Yeah, maybe I'll send it to you afterwards, and you can look at it. There's probably going to be some things you disagree with there. The reason that's the case is because this has been a super contentious issue for a long time, and I don't think.
But imagine what a community center could have done for this community.
So let's address that then. Let's ask that question then. Let's start off with this, because this is a question that I can't seem to have gotten an answer from anyone yet. Nobody seems to know what the answer is. First things first, let's knock this out of the way. So you said Aspen was kind of a unique community.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any way where whatever was that community center served in Aspen would be serving in a different manner here in New Milford? Is there anything different about the characteristic features of Aspen and New Milford where you would expect something different from those community centers?
No, I think a community center is necessary in all communities that want to have a feeling of community and want to build a feeling of community. First of all, the process should involve the community. That is what I saw. And that's what I was involved with the Red Brick. I was hired to investigate the legal underpinnings and the funding available statewide for the Red Brick Arts Center. And so I was at the meetings, and we heard everybody. We heard the naysayers, and we heard the positives, and we heard the gray areas, and we heard the questioners, and we heard everything. Everybody got together. It raised everybody. Conflict is good. Conflict actually provides an opportunity for the growth of community, and we shouldn't actually put our head in the sand about it. And I know you're saying that there's been a lot of conflict around the Pettibone Center. Well, I'm all for it. Let's go at it.
Yeah,
Let's
debate.
do it. Because then we're defining what our community is.
Okay, well then.
Define community. I'm not. And Mike, I know you've been here longer. I'm sure you have a sense of what community is for you. Yep. But I'm not here to define it for everybody.
Well, then let's hear how you envision it. Then I'm not asking for a concrete definition necessarily, but let's talk in concrete terms. What when you say community center, what do you have in your mind?
Okay, so there are traditional businesses in town that and talented people who need help, and they deserve the government support. Nonprofits that provide services to the underserved communities, they need a place to rest their laurels and something that's affordable for them, because they're not, wealthy businesses. And people who are suffering in the community, maybe shortfalls, financially, having problems with domestic violence. People also who are artists. I mean, we've touched in New Milford on the artists community with the Gallery 25, and it's a great thing. I love it.
Village Center for the Arts, yeah.
It's great. But we could have so much more. I think that there's a lot of really, really crafty and arty people here. I see it around me all the time. It'd be great for them to have a place to show their wares, to show their abilities and their craft. I think and to draw the community together for those types of openings for galleries and that sort of stuff. I really do. I think that the community center should be something like that's for the community, not for the government so much.
So less a municipal office building than what you've described?
Yep.
Okay. So we're veering off of the Board of Finance a little bit, but it's a subject you brought up, so we kind of have to touch up on it at least. So the last thing I'll ask about when it comes to the community center is related to Pettibone itself. Now, I've said that I'm not axiomatically against the concept of a community center, but I've also said that I think we're having tunnel vision with Pettibone. That the town has made a pretty clear effort to move DPW to Century Brass. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that site. That's a gray area. I don't know how to describe it. It's a brown field that we've had, and we've spent an unconscionable fortune remediating for the purposes of selling that land. It's about 80 or so acres. We had one serious offer in the last 20 years, and we ran them out on a rail. Good or bad, we did run them out on a rail. And, maybe we should have. Maybe we should have run them out on a rail. But it's become clear that the town is never selling this property. But if DPW moves there, not only can DPW get an upgrade in their facilities, which I think the town is generally in favor of, but you can put an end to spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year into remediating this brownfield, because you don't have to sell it. You don't have to meet the bank's demands, basically. So in doing that, they're going to have the ability to consolidate certain facilities. So Park and Rec's maintenance division, since there's so much overlap with DPW and what they do, that's been talked about being moved there as well. And then that would be, in the end, partly financed by relinquishing some of the DPW's old property into private hands. Do you think that this is an opportunity here to have what you're describing as a community center better serve as a community center than, as you've described, Pettibone is, where we have something brand new that we can construct and we have some sort of funding mechanism in place at least, with a vision of at some point relinquishing some of what?
To make it happen?
Yeah.
I don't know if I know enough about it. Honestly,
okay.
That's something I would look at. Obviously, I'm not tied to Pettibone. I wasn't here for the contention, although I wouldn't at all advise that we walk away from it. It is our building, and we should make the best use of it that we can.
Yeah, Pete Bass, I prodded him on my interview pretty hard on this issue, and he said pretty affirmedly that building's not going anywhere anytime soon. So let's come back to the Board of Finance.
Make the best of it. Let's do it. Let's jump in with both feet. Make it what it needs to be, which is a place for community to build.
So let's come back to the Board of Finance, because we kind of veered off topic a little bit. And I'm really only here because I'm interested in, you're running for a seat on the Board of Finance, so let's talk about that. And the one issue that we know we're going to run into every year is the budget. It's going to happen in February, March, April, May of next year. So let's dive into that. And this is another topic we've beaten to death. So we'll try to look at this from kind of a 30,000 foot view, rather than really honing in on things like we've done with some of our previous interviews. So let's just start with this. What are the philosophical principles that guide your view of taxation generally, and how that would translate to a budget development process here in New Milford?
Okay. So obviously the budget needs to be a balanced budget. And the historical use of the money is very important as to how that budget is created. And there needs to be lots of input from various community sectors, not just two, not just 10, not just for profit, not just not profit. Everybody needs to have input. This is how we are setting our priorities. So the budget needs to be set according to the priorities that are brought to us by our people. And so, you take all that information and you ask the hard questions. You open up the door and you let the people who come in say exactly what they want. You don't pussyfoot around what they want and what they need, what their concerns are. And you go at it. You say yes as often as possible without ending up with a budget that's in the red. All right. I know that there has been some surplus talk. I've heard about it. I know that's been something that's been a concern. Some members on the Board of Finance definitely see the surplus being used in very specific and one way. And
one dimensional, is that the word you're looking for? Unidimensional? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, unidimensional. And there's not enough input on how that surplus is being used. So I know if that's the case, I'd like to see more input. Now, the budget process is not an easy process, and we're all going to go through it together. And you have to speak up. You have to come in and say what you think is necessary. We have a lovely and a beautiful town. It's well maintained generally. And I think that's important. But there's lots of other things that are happening. It's also a very large town. The population is much more varied than I think anybody really realizes. We're not the typical, Ridgefield population where everybody's a certain level of income and capabilities. And so we need to be aware of that. We need to know that we can take care of our people. We need to do that with the budget process.
Do you see the surplus, let's say not necessarily the recent surpluses because they've been attributed to COVID pretty seriously, but do you see the surplus issue as being a major problem?
I only see a surplus issue as being a major problem if it's not handled responsibly.
Okay, so would you want to try to get that surplus to as minimal a level as possible?
Well, that would be ideal, but okay. I think that's unrealistic. I think that it happens, right? I mean, we're all like, I have surpluses sometimes and I don't have surpluses in my business sometimes. It's just how it works. And you do have to plan for those times when it's lean. I do think that the way the surplus is being used may be something that we need to look at.
Okay, well, I asked town council candidate Sal Rankowitz about lines of questioning at the joint budget hearing. So now that we have a member of the candidate for the Board of Finance, what are you looking for from the presenters, and what type of questions can they expect to get?
Yeah. So they need to know what the amount of the surplus is. They need
Oh,
to
sorry.
know-
I'm sorry. So at the joint budget hearings, we're not talking about the
it's all
surplus.
the
We're talking
budget.
about the budget now in terms of,
Just the general budget.
yeah. So I'll repeat that just for clarity's sake. So when it comes to the line of questionings at the joint budget hearings for all of the presenters, what are you looking for from the presenters, and what types of questions can they expect to get?
My questions are always going to be open-ended, and they're going to allow for the presenters to tell me and tell the Board of Finance what it is that they are worried about, because that's what the budget can help with. Their worries, their financial fears. And so that's really important. My greatest asset as a Board of Finance member in that capacity would be as the mediator in the room, because I'm very capable and trained to keep a conversation open and balanced from a power standpoint, so that there is lots of discourse and the decisions can be made with all the information on the table.
So with that mediation, then, do you see there being any competing interests when serving the public in the budget process?
No, I don't have an interest as a mediator.
No. Do you see there not? I'm not saying a conflict of interest. I'm saying are there competing interests that a Board of Finance member is going to have to serve in producing the budget?
I still have the same reaction to your question, Mike. So try it again. What is it that you're seeing a competing interest?
Okay, serving the taxpayers in the sense that they don't want to have their taxes raised infinitely, and also providing the services that the taxpayers are interested in. Because obviously, if you can have an infinite supply of income, then you don't have to worry about the interest that's being served by the rate of taxation.
So are you suggesting, so we can get to this, that my legal and or mediation practice is a competing interest with the Board of
No. I think that I'm asking if you're, so when you have two parties, right, in a mediation process, if you're, when we talk about compete, right. But let's say you have an example of a competing interest that I'm thinking of here is that you have an interest to keep the tax rate low, but you also have, let me do this so you can see it, tax rate low, but you also have an interest to provide a certain level of service. So these two interests, are they in competition? Because I see them as being in competition, so that it's tough to get to, let's serve all of these services and also keep the tax rates low. Do you see that as a competing interest?
Not that black and white. You don't have to serve all the services and keep the tax rates low. You do have to be a hearing member of your community. You need to listen. Whether you can provide with everything is just not realistic. Everybody understands that. We're all adults. We all manage our home budgets. We all manage our business budgets. We know. Mm-hmm. Okay, so everybody who is treated like and respectful adult is going to understand that some things can and some things can't happen, and there's going to be a yay or nay. But it's not a black and white thing that you have to provide all the services. You do have to listen, though. You do have to. That is your job. In a democracy, that is the job. I mean, really, when you come down to it, it's tell me what you need. I want to hear. And it's, let's see what we can do to help you get it for yourself. Let's see what we can do for the government to help you, maybe. Let's see where we can put you into the system so that you can get what you need.
Is there a place to say no in building the budget?
Of course.
Okay.
There always is. I say no all the time. I'd like a new refrigerator, Mike. Can I get a new refrigerator? No.
Right. I'm sure if the mayor, when he built his mayor's office budget, requested gold-plated toilets, I'm sure the answer is no.
No.
Right. So to that effect, then, are there any areas for improvement in the process, or any of the line items you'd like to highlight in terms of places for improvement?
So I'd like to actually say probably not. It's been going this way for a long time, but I haven't done it yet. So I'll let you know if I get elected and I go through the process.
How have you been following the recent budgets, the last year or two?
Yeah, I actually looked at last year's budget. I went through the process. I sat down with, as I said, some of the members of the Board of Finance to try to figure out how it works and what the process is and how it was established.
Okay. Has the Board of Education side of the budget ever been cut?
So I hear mixed things about that. When I first started looking at finances in New Milford, it was, the thing that people were concerned about, cutting the Board of Education budget. And so I would have to sit down and look at the different budgets. And it's not just a black and white thing. It's about, you got so many services you have to provide at the education level. You have so many buildings, you have so many fixed costs, you have variable costs. You really need to understand the bigger picture in order to know whether it was actually cut. But I do think that there has been some concern that some of the surplus is being created from cuts to the Board of Education budget. And I don't know if that serves the community. I don't know.
So we're actually going to start wrapping up our interview here and getting into Q&A. I'm seeing kind of a lot of participation from the comments section, which is great. So before we do that, let's get to our last line of questioning here then. And that's unfortunately to talk about the elephant in the room. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I'd be derelict in my duties not to bring this up. It's what everybody's been talking about. I've said it will probably result in a single issue vote on election day. And that's really the only reason I'm bringing it up. I'm not going to dwell on it. Just one or two questions on it because you're on the DTC ticket. I have to ask. Have you seen the recent campaign marketing material that the DTC has released over the last 2 weeks?
Sure. Of course.
Okay. Is this something you consider an accurate reflection of the town and the majority of Democrats in New Milford?
I don't know. I really wouldn't have an opinion about it. It's marketing.
Okay.
I don't think marketing is supposed to be necessarily a reflection of a town. That's not government. That's not community. It's marketing. It's about providing an opportunity for more Democrats to get involved with local government. It's marketing.
Okay. So the marketing strategy I'm referring to is the references to the riots on January 6th. Are we on the same page here? Are we talking about the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to know if we were talking about the same campaign marketing materials.
What's your opinion about it?
I think it's pretty awful to brush Democrats in this town well, I've talked about it on this show. So just broadly, I think that the campaign marketing strategy is pretty gross. And that's why it's getting pushback from Democrats in this town, because I don't think that the majority of voters in this town are Nazis. I don't think they're in support of genocide. I just don't think that what happened on January 6th is a reflection of the character of New Milford. And I think that's a really unfair representation of, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in 2019, there were a lot of Democrats that voted for, let's say, PPAS. And to characterize those Democrats as being on the same plane as those jackasses from January 6th, I think is really, really awful. So
I don't think that's what the marketing said. It's not about PPAS. It's about, having a balanced government and, being able to provide more than one viewpoint. It's also about the fear of a president who was very, very frightening to many, many people, still out there in the ether. I think that's what it's about. I don't think it's about necessarily Pete Bass, but I do think that we need to understand that we've become very polarized, unfortunately. And it wasn't the Democrats who made us polarized, actually. So.
Yeah, and I when I say these sort of things, folks, I've said it before 1,000 times. I don't say this about Democrats in general. When I refer to the literature coming out from the DTC, I'm specifically referring to the DTC and its leadership. I'm not painting all Democrats in this town with the characterization I just offered. Just the leadership, and because they're the ones making those decisions, and it's unfair to do that to Democrats in this town. So, with that said, I guess the last question on that topic is the material that's been coming out. I mean, do you stand behind it, condemn it, or are ambivalent to it? What's the final position here?
It's marketing. I know where its place is. I'm fine with it.
Okay, so that sounds like ambivalent? So like somewhere in between
In an
condemning?
ideal world, Mike, I would
Okay.
love us all to be above board and highly respectful and not have to talk about a January 6th.
All right.
Honestly, but I also don't think it's smart to ignore it either. So it happened, and it happened in our country. God knows how it happened, but it did. And I think we should all face it. And if this marketing flyer gets us talking about it across the dinner table, all the power to us. I told you, I believe conflict leads to good resolution. All right. And if this is what this marketing is doing, I'm fine with that. Let's talk about it. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, I have a friend, Jeremy Kaufman, who takes that approach to how he views the world of policy and politics and debate in general. So with that said, now that we've gotten through all that, so Robyn, thanks so much for coming on. Before we get into Q&A, Robyn, just like we did at the beginning of the show, remind people how they can reach and follow you.
Please call me. I can be reached at 718-316-2219. Be kind. Be respectful. I will be kind and respectful to you as well. Yeah,
folks, I know my audience. She has to say that. And it's your fault, audience. It's your fault. We need civility. We need respect. You want to challenge her? That's fine. This is not an opportunity for you guys to go harass her. So, especially because she agreed to come on the show. Like I have to stress how grateful I am to her for doing that. And she had the guts to do that. So guys at home, like if you're going to take down her phone number, civility more than anything. So let's dive now into the Q&A. You ready, Robyn?
Yep.
Awesome. So let's go. Okay. Oh boy. So there's Joe D has asked quite a few questions here. Okay, so I think this is in reference to your mentioning of the hours that you're going to be working. Joe asks, what will you do during budget season? There are nightly meetings with presentations and hundreds of pages to review. I think that's a reference to what you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely, and I understand that. And I went into this with full knowledge of what's involved. I'm capable of taking care of those responsibilities, all right? I'm also capable of taking time off from my job to do that. And I fully intend to prioritize what my responsibilities to the Board of Finance and the budget process would be.
Are you in private practice?
I am in private practice,
okay.
And I'm also building a private practice. So that's important too.
Yeah, I work for myself as well, and one of the advantages of working for yourself is you do get to make your own hours. Those hours usually are terrible, but you do get to make them. You do get to make them. So yep. if you can take a whole week off, but that means you're going to have to make up that whole week and then some next week. But you can do that. So Joe also asks, and I think this speaks to you being an attorney. Have you read the charter?
Yes.
All right.
And the code of ethics. They are sitting with me at all times right here. I like reading things.
All right, then.
They're marked up in yellow.
So Joe,
that's where you start when you're in government. So
yep, yeah, that's something I've read. I don't know, quite a few times. I went to all the Charter Revision Commission meetings. I'm that nerd that I was the one guy in the audience for almost all of those meetings.
Mike, let's have lunch and talk charter talk. Let's do it.
All right, Nate. Let's get a date. You're gonna have a hell of a time with me here in the middle of leaf season, but maybe in a month or so.
I know you're busy.
Yeah. He continues, and this is a question I asked, so it seems to be an expansion on that. Have you discussed the dissolution of the Board of Finance with any of your running mates?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Seth asks, and this is, I have no idea what this is a reference to, but Seth asks, why has your husband not paid all of the taxes owed on his Tesla? I'm not sure what relevance that is, but go ahead.
I don't know. I'm not in charge of the taxes on his Tesla.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. Joe asks, do you think a 33% increase in per pupil spending in our school district from 2009 to 2019 can be considered a budgetary cut?
That's an interesting question. Let me just make sure I understand it. A 33% increase in.
Do you want me to read it again?
Yeah.
All right. I'll do it, and I'll try to do it in pace because I was reading it on the fly.
Yeah.
Do you think a 33% increase in per pupil spending in our school district from 2009 to 2019, 10 years, can be considered a budgetary cut?
All right, so it sounds to me like there's something to do with the increase in the cost of educating our students that's being taken by people as resulting in a cut in the budget to the Board of Education. In other words, we must not be keeping pace with that kind of an increase over 10 years. That's what it sounds to me. And if I'm wrong, put your note in there. I think we should try to keep pace with the cost of educating our students at the highest level they deserve in our town. We have a beautiful town. We should be putting out great students in the world, great citizens.
Okay, what additional roles would you give to the Board of Finance? This sounds like charter revision again.
Yeah, it's about that. It's about giving more decision-making authority. So the Board of Finance could definitely be the first to sit down with the Director of Finance and go through the budget first instead of it being last, basically. Take and shoulder that responsibility in the context of its community involvement, its meetings, and its inviting the community to talk. So they could be at the forefront of it.
Okay, I'm going to edit this question a little bit because I don't think the word he's using is the word he's looking for. Would you consider so in reference to those changes for the Board of Finance, would you consider line item authority? It sounds like line item discretion is what he's talking about when it comes to the building of the budget.
So are we giving authority to somebody in particular?
Oh, no. So the town council has line item authority. The Board of Education on the Board of Education side of the budget has line item. It's discretion is the word we're talking about here. Discretion. Right. When it comes to the Board of Finance. Yeah.
But they should have authority. I don't know if they should have final decision making, but they should have authority over developing the budget within their realms. Mm-hmm.
Should the Board of Finance have any discretion over line items?
I think the Board of Finance can certainly sit down with each of these town council, Board of Education, and say, this is what you're asking us to do. We need to all work together to create a budget that works for all of us.
Yeah, because I'm sure you're aware that the Board of Finance can only adjust when it comes to their review, the number at the top, and make recommendations if it doesn't pass.
Right.
Yeah. Oh. So, okay. I think we talked about this, and I think you've already answered this, but let's do it anyway. Do you think Pettibone is a candidate for a community center? And if so, what budget would you put on the project? If not, what budget would you put on building a community center, and how would you propose funding? All right, we're going to break this up. Because this is just a mouthful. So let's start with this. Do you think Pettibone is a candidate for a community center?
Sure. Absolutely. Okay. So is any other building that the town owns.
Okay. So what budget would you put on the project? So
that's impossible.
Okay.
I don't even know what the project is. What does the community want? The Red Brick Center for the Arts, they wanted an art center and a center for their nonprofits. Okay, great. If that's what they want, then we build the budget. That's just, I can't, I have no idea.
All right. Okay, so if not, okay, so I think that kind of answers the third question here. If not, what budget would you put on building a community center, and how would you propose funding? Okay, so I think you've already answered the how would you build a budget. So how would you propose, if we're not going to have Pettibone serve as the community center that you're envisioning, if we're to say build new, let's say, like we talked about, how would you propose funding? I'm trying to just pass this question on to you, but
sure.
Joe has a hard time with his phone sometimes.
Okay, no, I get it. I'm hoping that we're answering Joe's question, okay? So funding for anything like this comes from a variety of sources. It comes from the local government, it comes from the state government, it might even come from federal opportunities. And it also comes from the private sector. One thing that I saw happen very strongly in Aspen was a private sector involvement in getting the Red Brick Center up and running and renovated, okay? And I think that that's really important. And that's why you have to start with community, because then you get community to pitch in from their pocket at the end. So that's really important. That's it's all spaces. This is a big project. It's not going to happen like this, but it has to happen. It has to move forward. It's not moving forward.
Okay, so we actually have a lot of other questions here that we're going to get to. So Robyn, would you mind hanging out an extra 4 or 5 minutes to get to all these questions, or are we going to hard cap it at 8 o'clock?
You have me for as long as you need me.
All right, Joe, you have bombarded this question section, so we're going to skip your questions and come back to them. to give other people an
So,
opportunity to chime
call
in.
me.
Yeah. Diane
You got my
asks.
number.
Yep. So Diane asks, and I think you've already. I'm very sure you already answered this question, but we'll ask it anyways to get it through. Are you wedded to Pettibone to the Pettibone site, or might another be considered? I think you've already said that it's worth considering another site.
I don't know enough about it right now. I'd have to know more to be able to say. I mean, Pettibone seems like an ideal site. It's big and it's right in kind of like an easily accessible. You want easy access for something like this if you're going to have large groups coming in. And it reminds me of the Red Brick Center. If anybody goes online at the Aspen, it looks just like it. So I'm sure it was built in the same period. And so it just holds a special place because of that, but it doesn't necessarily mean I know best.
All right. So Diane asks, oh God, the Board of Education budget has been debated as being too low by Democrats. Do you believe the Board of Education has advanced a budget they feel has A, a good chance to pass at referendum, or B, what they really need? I may have to break this up for you so you can answer it, because that was also another mouthful.
Yeah. So there's a Board of Education budget. Let me ask questions because that's really the best way. And I think Diane wants to know whether it is sufficient for what they need, and whether it can be passed by a referendum. All right. And that's kind of the two things I'm seeing. What am I missing?
Okay, so I'm going to break this up because I don't know how else to do this because it is a mouthful. Do you believe the Board of Education has advanced a budget they feel has a good chance to pass at referendum?
I hope so. That's their job.
Okay, so I think this is in reference to a question that was raised at the candidates event that was held on Wednesday night. I think it was just this past Wednesday night. And the candidates had, all of them were like, this is a really good question, a really tough question too. No, that wasn't the toughest question of the night. They had tougher, there was another one they had a real trouble with. Does the Board of Education have a duty to pass a budget? I think this is a question she's asking here. Does the Board of Education have a duty to pass a budget that will likely pass at referendum on the first try?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't see why that is. The first duty should be to create a budget that serves the needs of the students in the school system. And if they have to go for referendum and they know that's going to happen, maybe that is part of the duty, but I don't think it's necessarily the first thing.
Okay, so then the second half of that was, I think, do you think they have?
That they proposed a budget that meets the needs of the students?
Yeah.
It's not my job. I'm not looking to be on the Board of Education.
Okay, all right. Well then, we don't have time to expand on that, sorry. Let's see. Okay. Excuse me while I rifle through all these questions here. What is the median income in Aspen and what is the median income in New Milford?
They're about comparable, actually, at least for the people who live there year round. So I think it's about 120, but I could be wrong. And
is that a reference to household income? Okay.
Household income, yeah.
All right. Because there's a million ways to measure that, so I just didn't want it to be more specific.
Yep. And I know that directly, I don't want anybody to think that I'm going to, I can directly compare New Milford to Aspen. It's, as I said in the beginning, it's a very different community and it's a very different economic structure. But at the same time, I have been through a process of creating community through a community center and other things. For example, in downtown, it's very possible that the downtown could be beautified and we could do, competitions for artists to do murals and statues that we really could make. I think Pete and his government's doing a great job in using that green. I love it. I love every time I go down there and there's something going on. I think we could even do more. And I just can, because I know what Aspen has done. So I've been it, I've lived it. I know what this is. Okay.
So what are the major drivers of budgetary surplus? Excuse me, Facebook is loading up on me. What are the major drivers of budgetary surplus? I think this is in reference specifically to Milford. Oh, for crying out loud. And what do you feel have been inappropriate uses / better uses of budgetary surplus?
So I've only heard what I've heard, guys.
Okay.
All right. I wasn't in the process. So don't kill the messenger. All right. So it is about cutting the Board of Education and not providing the kind of education that I think some of the people really want. That's what I've heard, and we'll see. We'll see when I get in there if that's what I find out. And then, I think we spend a lot of money on public works, which is great. It makes a beautiful town. And I love my road, and it's really well maintained by Public Works. I'm very pleased whenever I see them working on it because I live on a dirt road. And I think that's important, but I do hear a lot of talk about infrastructure, and infrastructure is really important, but people don't live on infrastructure. People don't live, and thrive because they've got great roads. They live and thrive for other reasons. I'd like to provide for those other reasons.
Okay. Let's see. Are you familiar with, I think you've already kind of answered this question. What were the Board of Education? Facebook scroll is not locking for me, so it is jumping all over for me, so you have to forgive me as this gets stunted when I read them.
But you can't follow it? Come on.
Yeah, no, it's auto scrolling on me like all over the place because we're live. So you have to forgive me.
So,
all right.
Keep your questions short and simple, guys, because
yeah.
This is the long ones.
Yep. Okay. What were the Board of Education surplus versus the town surplus? It just loaded up on me again.
It just loaded up on you again.
Yep. Yeah. So I guess the question.
Numbers. Are we asking about numbers?
Let's say yes.
I heard 2 million for both. That's
okay. Okay. Joe asks, how is, quote, it didn't end on January 6th. Trump extremists took over the New Milford GOP, and now they're taking over the town, end quote. Not painting the New Milford GOP as extremists.
Are you quoting from a flyer? It sounds like it.
It's either the flyer or one of the recent posts.
Okay. It's marketing.
Okay. And I think you kind of answered this as well. And this is the last question for the night. So again, thanks so much for coming on. Joe asks, to the above, what he just mentioned, is that fostering inclusion and cooperation?
Oh, that flyer?
Yeah.
No, but we're not in a place right now where fostering inclusion and cooperation is being supported by the Republicans either. So I don't know. What would you like me to tell you? We all have to take a step back. That would be great. I'd love that. I don't want to live in this community, but the last 4 years has been just that. It's been really, really frightening. I mean, I have definitely been involved in conversations with my own family members who are Republicans, who I love dearly, where the heat gets so high and you can't get anybody to listen, right? And it's been attacking. I've been called, all kinds of names. This is just starting elsewhere. We're just taking it as a marketing cue. And that's fine because you guys, Republicans in the national government, they started it. I'd like to end it, but that's just not going to happen.
All right, then.
We're free to do that.
So, Robyn, if you can just hang out for me just 1 minute. I should have mentioned this before we started so that we can get our technicals ready so we make sure we close properly. So if you can just hang out for 1 more minute. Folks, just as I've mentioned before, we're going to be interviewing Board of Finance Chairman Walter O'Connor on Wednesday night at 7. And then we'll have a regular show like we normally do starting Sunday night. And that's the last one before the election. So I guess get out there and vote as everyone's been saying. We'll go over more of that in detail. We'll go over these interviews that we've been doing so that everybody can get a TV guide version of how these things have gone and how the interviewers have answered some of these questions you guys are most interested in. So that's what's coming up. Robyn, thanks so much for coming on. And everyone else at home, thanks so much for staying with us. Thanks so much for all of these questions. We haven't had so many questions in some time.
Yeah. Thank you for challenging me. Keep them coming. I'll learn and I will educate. I'm all ears. I would like to know